Hello, everyone. How you doing today? So sorry to keep you waiting there. I hate being late for anything. I really do hate being late for anything. But here I am, ready to talk to you. No one panic. Here I am. Wow, lovely day. Lovely day it is. I've got plenty of water. And if you're new, if you're just joining us or you're new, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell so you become notified whenever we do one of these. And hey, if you want to post this on Reddit, you want to post this on your Facebook, on your Twitter, shout out to the people who consistently post these lives on Reddit. You're doing great work. I really deeply appreciate it. Now, quick announcement for all of you who are Patreon supporters. Tomorrow, 5 p.m., most likely, 99% chance that tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time will be the time in which we have our patrons only live stream. So 5 p.m. tomorrow for patrons. So 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's a slim chance something might get in the way, but probably not. So if you're going to join us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, patrons, we'll be there and we will have a great conversation. I will only answer your questions. I will just sit there and answer the questions of the patrons. It'll be just a special, intimate little gathering for patrons only. All right. Zapatistas, Marcos. All righty. So be sure to check that out. I also wanted to mention a couple things. Shortly after this live broadcast, I will post my appearance today from the George Galloway Mother of All Talk Shows. It is an honor to be able to work with George Galloway, to appear on his talk show, and today I was able to go on the Mother of All Talk Shows. So I will be posting the clip of my appearance on the Mother of All Talk Shows from this afternoon. It was evening in Britain, but it was afternoon here. I sat in front of my lovely bookshelf, and George and I went back and forth. It was a lot of fun, so I'll be posting that shortly afterwards. Plus, last night, I had the real privilege and honor of engaging with David Fox. Shout out to David Fox of Australia, and Dust James. Shout out to Dust James of North Carolina on their program, their podcast, Working Class Revolt. And that was lots of fun. Lots of fun. I'll be posting that. It's already on Dust James' channel. If you want to go check it out right now, it's already on the channel of David Fox, I believe. But I will be posting it. I will be posting it on this channel later. So quite a lot of exciting stuff coming up on this channel. I'm very excited about it. So that's some business there. Is there an, oh, yes. This Saturday, there will be a stream, a live streamed web conference for the Center for Political Innovation. We're having a live streamed web conference reacting to the U.S. elections, talking about the end of empire and multilateralism. It's going to be very exciting, and that will be this coming Saturday, a week from yesterday. The Center for Political Innovation will have web conference number 2. Justin Simons is going to be the keynote speaker. Dust James will also be speaking. There'll be a presentation by Gavin Lockhart, leader of Students and Youth for a New America, the campus-based activist group. There will be some musical performances. Good friend of the show, Max the Sax, will be performing some music, as will good friend Paul Shepard. Paul Shepard will also be performing, so we'll have some good cultural performances to go with the great dynamic presentations. I'll be giving my 2 cents at the end, but, I'll just be there to give, some comments towards the end. It's mainly, other Center for Political Innovation activists. So a lot of exciting things happening. Didn't mean for the first 4 or 5 minutes here to just be announcements. But hey, why the heck not, right? Why the heck not, right? So much to talk about. And a lot of exciting things in the works. I just had a great conversation with Dan Kovalik. A lot of you have probably watched it already. General strike. A lot of you have probably already watched that. That was tremendous. I've gotten some interesting requests for me on a podcast recently. Some interesting podcasts have reached out to me already. So it looks like I'm going to be on some nice podcasts pretty soon. So that's going to be great. Free trade stand. Okay. Free trade. Socialism. Yeah, and keep the super chats coming. The format that we do here, the way we do a typical live, which is how we're going to be doing it tonight, is what we're going to do is I am going to give my opening remarks, and then we'll do our roll call where I call out everyone as I see them. And then from there, I will just answer your super chat questions. Means problems with Trotskyist organizations. All right. Problems. Alrighty. So yeah, keep the super chats coming. You will get an answer during the second half of our show. But folks, I don't know if people saw this, but Jim Jeffries, who was the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, he was the U.S. envoy dealing with entities in Syria. He's outgoing. Zach's work. And socialism. David Lynch. He's outgoing, Jim Jeffries. And he's the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria. And he has come out today and said that he lied to Donald Trump about how many U.S. troops there were in Syria. That there's actually far more U.S. troops in Syria than the 200 or a few hundred that Donald Trump was told about. Now process that for just a minute. Donald Trump is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. He's the head of the executive branch. He's the president of the United States. So the U.S. special representative for Syria, the special envoy for Syria, lied to the president about how many troops there were in Syria. Now, it's not just simply a case of someone lying. It's not simply that. There's more to the story than that, though. I mean, it's not just a case of lying. The President of the United States, who's supposed to be the head of the U.S. Armed Forces, did not know how many troops there actually were. All right. Opportunity for real change. So, let me go over this again. The President of the United States, who's supposed to be the head, Bay Area 415, the President of the United States, who is supposed to be the head of the U.S. Armed Forces, did not know how many U.S. troops there were in Syria. And people below him lied to him about this. Who's really in charge? Black-owned. Who's really in charge? Who is really in charge of the United States right now? I mean, if the President of the United States doesn't know how many soldiers are in a country, number one, and on top of that, the people beneath him don't tell him, who makes the decision about what troops go where? I mean, who is really in charge of the country? If Donald Trump didn't know, who did know? This is very, very scary, folks. It seems to me that the people we elect are not really the ones who are in charge, and not really the ones running the show. Somebody else is in charge. Somebody else is running the show. That should be deeply, deeply disturbing. Who did decide how many troops went to Syria? I mean, it wasn't random. Somebody had to order those troops to go to Syria. But Donald Trump was never informed. So somebody made that decision. This is very eerie. There's all this talk of a shadow government. This is eerie, eerie stuff. Eerie stuff. Eerie, eerie stuff. Folks, I don't know if you saw, there was a big outpouring of Donald Trump supporters in Washington, D.C. this weekend for the Million MAGA March, the Stop the Steal gathering. Okay. The Stop the Steal gathering that took place, and there were a lot of Trump supporters out. There were a lot of Antifa kind of people. They had some scuffles. Some people got arrested for firearms violations. Some people got arrested for assault on a police officer. All right, great leap forward. Yeah, there were some scuffles in D.C. That was pretty rough. I don't know if people saw this morning, but Donald Trump tweeted, he said, he won because the left rigged the elections. And because of that, the media went wild and said, Trump has conceded. He said Biden won. And then Trump came out and said, I have not conceded anything. It's like comedy. This is like children. This is, it's pretty ridiculous. It's pretty ridiculous. Folks, Donald Trump is going to leave office. Don't know enough about that trade deal to comment on it. Donald Trump is going to leave office, folks. He's going to leave office. That's going to happen right now. It would take a lot of very, very difficult circumstances to have Trump not leave office right now. It would be quite a dramatic shift. The chances of Donald Trump staying in office are slim to none. However, he will never say he lost. He will never say I concede. People are talking about Trump TV and the TV network, and Trump will leave office with his personality cult well intact. He will leave office with a lot of supporters thinking it was rigged against him. And he will continue to be a force in American politics, and he will be probably the force that holds American conservatism together. That's the role that Donald Trump seems to be playing right now, because at this point, the conservative movement in the United States and the Republican Party are at kind of a loss of an identity. So Donald Trump does supply them with an identity. So I think he will still be around. He won't disappear into obscurity, and he will probably run in 2024. That said, yeah, we've still got big problems, folks. Joe Biden is coming into office. There's a lot of speculation I've seen around the internet that Joe Biden, they'll give him about a year. They'll give him about a year, and then they'll sit down with him and they'll say, hey, Joe, it might be a good time to retire and let Kamala Harris, who we handpicked, it might be a good time to retire and let Kamala Harris, who we've handpicked for leadership, become the new boss. Now, you can just retire and leave. Just retire. You're old. You're tired. That could be the easy way. Or we could really do this the hard way. We've got lots of tapes of you being inappropriate with women. We've got a lot of women who accused you. We got Kamala Harris, who's never retracted what she said when she said she believes the accusers against you. And that could get really ugly. So do you want to just retire peacefully, Joe, or do we want to have a Me Too thing? Do we want to get Me Too going again? I suspect that Joe has about a year in office before that happens. And I'm not the only person to make this prediction. Right? Many people have noted that the Me Too movement started in response to Donald Trump getting elected to the presidency, right? In response to the fact that Donald Trump is widely accused of sexual assault. And there was the tape and all of that. Because of that, Donald Trump, the Me Too movement, all kinds of people whose allegations had been ignored. All kinds of people who had basically been told to be silent, spoke up, and we had a society-wide conversation about sexual assault. Very good thing. Very, very good thing. But then many people noted that the Me Too movement ended when Joe Biden, who is notorious for sexual assault and inappropriate touching of women and all kinds of inappropriate behavior, became the front runner in the Democratic Party. Me Too was started by the Democrats to serve their anti-Trump agenda, and Me Too was ended by the Democrats to serve their anti-Trump agenda. But give it time. Give it time. It may come back if Joe Biden isn't willing to peacefully just retire for the good of the country. Wow. Wow, folks. Wow. Al Jazeera wrote it down. That is our political atmosphere. There was a line in Kamala Harris's vice presidential nomination speech. And in that speech, she said, "I know a predator when I see one." And most people assumed she was talking about Donald Trump, except bashing Donald Trump at the Democratic National Convention would not be awkward at all. But there was an awkward pause following it. Furthermore, Kamala Harris has never retracted her statements that she believes Joe Biden's accusers. I think that they are waiting for Joe Biden to get in, take the oath, be president for a year, maybe just a few months, and then they have Me Too, they have the bullet in the chamber, so to speak, to bring down the Joe Biden presidency, or Joe Biden will retire and be remembered as a lovely old grandpa, and Kamala Harris will be our president. I wrote a book. I saw this coming 100 miles away. I wrote a book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. And the book has been selling like hotcakes. It was reviewed by Max Perry, a great journalist, and his review was picked up by everybody, Counterpunch and Greenville Post, and his review just went everywhere. It's been republished in so many different places. Un's review, oh my goodness. Max Perry's review of my book went everywhere. Then Helen Mercer reviewed my book for Morning Star, which is the communist daily newspaper of the United Kingdom. I've gone on podcasts. I went on the Angie Speaks podcast to talk about the book. I went a lot of different places to talk about the book. So this book I've written on Kamala Harris strikes a chord. It strikes a chord, and it's grabbed a lot of people's attention. So my hope is that people will read this book and learn from it and actually understand what I'm saying, because in the book I use Kamala Harris as a case in point. It's not simply about one woman. It's about left-wing politics and what does it mean to be left-wing in our time? What does it mean to be a leftist, right? And I talk about the fact that basically leftist politics, stripped of Marxism, has become a crude Freudian manipulation, right? That it's no longer about a progressive project to transform humanity. Instead, it becomes about giving people permission to release their impulses. And I had a lot to say in the book. And I didn't just talk about Kamala Harris. I talked about the Soviet Union. I talked about Libya. I talked about Syria. I talked about Donald Trump. I talked about Hitler. I talked about, the trajectory of U.S. politics from McCarthyism to the New Left, from the New Left to the neoconservative era, all the way up to Obama and now Donald Trump. I talked about divisions in the ruling class. I talked about how Kamala Harris rose. I talked about Kamala Harris's family background, her estrangement from her father, and her father's criticism of her, which is certainly rather pointed. I talked about why it is that Kamala seems to reference her own childhood far more than any politician ever, right? It's bizarre. Look how many times, watch a Kamala Harris speech, how many times does Kamala Harris talk about her own childhood? How many times does Kamala Harris invoke her own childhood? How many t-shirts are there with 10-year-old Kamala Harris on them? Right? How many? How many? I mean, this is unhealthy. Kamala Harris is over 50 years old. She is well over 50 years old, for goodness sakes. But every speech, t-shirts, articles, essays, it's like we're supposed to vote for 10-year-old Kamala Harris. It's bizarre when she's sentencing, when she's boasting about the fact that she sent the parents of truant school kids to jail, right? She sent parents to jail because their kids skipped school. She brings up her own childhood in order to justify it. I wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for my education. Depriving an education from a child is tantamount to a crime. This is a deeply unhealthy woman. Read what her father has said. Read about what went on and her estrangement from her father. Kamala Harris is a deeply, deeply unhealthy person. She is deeply, deeply unhealthy. And that in and of itself is not a problem. A lot of people suffer from mental health problems, right? I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's a big problem in our society right now, is the widespread, the suicide rate, the mental health problems that people have. So, I'm not saying she's a bad person simply because she clearly has some issues. What I'm saying is bad is that she is surrounded by people who know how to push her buttons. And that is very, very, very clear. There are people around Kamala Harris who know very, very well how to push her buttons and how to get what they want, right? And the fact that Kamala is thinking about her 10-year-old self constantly, the fact that she seems full of rage and she has a desire to harm other people, a very, very big desire to harm other people. I'm telling you, there's something going on here. Now, folks, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist, right? I don't normally comment on this kind of thing, but I'm watching the chat go by. And I just saw a chat that went by and it said, deleted by the Google moderator team. Who is the Google moderator team? Right? Are there Google execs watching this right now? Is this a manual team? I know we have moderators in the chat, right? I know Arthur Porter is watching. He's a mod and all that. But who in the world, who is this Google moderator team? I have never seen that before. I have never seen that before. A comment went by, and then it went, this comment has been deleted by the Google moderator team. What in the world did I just see? That is the weirdest thing. I have never seen anything like that. I hope it's artificial intelligence, as Anthony is saying. That is the most weird thing I have ever seen. I'm sorry. I usually don't break the fourth wall or the fifth wall or the cyber wall or whatever and look at this thing. But that is bizarre. I can't snapshot it because it's already way past. But that is downright weird. That is downright weird. The Google moderator team, right? I know there are comments, that if they think your comment's offensive, if you use words like stupid or the F word or whatever, it like suppresses your comment, right? But I have never seen deleted by the Google moderator team. That is weird. Hey, Google moderator team, are you watching right now? Are you a fan of what we're doing here? Do you like what we have to say here? I mean, I'm glad you're watching. If there's actually an individual, right, if this isn't a bot, if there's actual Google moderator team, shout out to you. Glad you're watching. Glad you're here. Stick around. You might learn something. Hey, I've worked for evil corporations too before. Trust me. You know what I mean? I worked at an insurance firm before. I worked at some fast food companies. So, I don't blame you for working for Google. Yes, Google is an evil corporation. I don't blame you for working for it. I have no hostility to you. Got to pay the bills, right? I mean, if you didn't, I buy Starbucks coffee sometimes. No, I don't. But I go to Starbucks every so often. And, just working at Google doesn't make you a bad person. No one here thinks that. We like you. We like you. We really like you, right? We really like the fact that you're giving us a platform here. There's no hostility to you. We don't really like Eric Schmidt very much. We don't like the prevailing ideology in Silicon Valley. right? I've talked about Silicon Valley fascism and the scary ideology there. But listen, Mr. Google moderator, if you're a real person, no personal offense, right? I'm glad you're watching this. I hope you stick around and watch some more of it because you'll love what we're doing here. You really will love what we're doing here. But hey, stick around. But I must ask you, and there's probably no way you can really answer this, right? Because I mean, maybe there is. I don't know. But Mr. Google moderator or Mrs. Right or Ms. Right? We don't know, right? Google moderator, whatever the correct way to address you is. Um, let me ask: is there a political bias? Right now, is it what I say or is it the viewpoint that I put out? Because I cannot make heads or tails of it, right? I mean, some videos I can't monetize them, other videos I can monetize them. I cannot make heads or tails of your rules. I mean, you expect me to self-report, for goodness sakes, right? They ask me, did your video contain this? Did it contain that? And they're the most vague terms. So, I wish you would make rules that were very clear that I could follow. And if you made very clear rules, it would make things way easier for me and for all of us content creators. If you didn't have rules that basically say, we can demonetize your video for any reason, we can shut down your account for any reason, if you didn't do that, it would make us all a lot happier, right? But maybe you don't make the rule. You're just watching, right? You're just here. You're enforcing the rules the bosses told you. But here's the thing: if the bosses would tell you the rules, right? They tell you the rules. If you could then tell us those rules, we could then follow those rules, and there wouldn't be all this controversy about people's accounts getting taken down and all that. So please, if you are still here, and if you are a real person, not an artificial intelligence bot, but if you are a real person, Mr. Google moderator team, let me ask you, send me an email right now and tell me the rules, what I can say and what I cannot say. And don't say vague things, right? Just lay it out there, because I am sick and tired of having to appeal these videos to, and not know. I mean, it's just up to somebody there and not know what the real rules are. So it's a little bit annoying. But that said, hey, I do think Google is an evil corporation. Not a big fan of Eric Schmidt. Not a big fan of him. But I think you're awesome, right? You're just doing your job. You're paying your bills. So, no offense to you, right? I'm trying to get by. You're trying to get by. And there you go. There you go. So I hope that wasn't a complete waste of airtime. But there you go. There you go, folks. Wow, what a lovely evening this is. I'm sitting here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I'm wearing a nice sweater and a nice shirt, and be nice to Google. Can't you just look up the policies? I have, and they are vague. They are vague. Anyway, check out my book on Kamala Harris, right? Because especially now, as we talk about Silicon Valley and the role that they played in the elections and everything that's coming up with, Donald Trump, and yeah, a lot to be concerned about. Is it chilly in New York? It is. It is chilly in New York. It's like starting to be wintertime once again in New York. So, folks, keep the super chats coming, by the way. The way we do this, right, after the opening remarks, from there, I do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. Then from there, I answer the super chat questions. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 to get through. And that'll be fine, but keep them coming. Any more questions, send them my way, and we'll just bang them out, and that'll be our evening. But folks, I'm really excited about the Center for Political Innovation. Very, very exciting what it's doing. It's going to be a great web conference coming up. But there's international interest in the Center for Political Innovation. The Google mods don't like your sweater. Oh, that's a bummer. Should I have worn the red or the yellow? Would they have liked that? Oh, my goodness. I'm going to blame my wife for this. I am going to tell Matches, you told me to wear this sweater, and the Google mods didn't like it. It's all your fault. I'm going to blame my wife for this. I am going to blame my wife for this. There's going to be some serious marriage drama once this is over. Just kidding. Anyway, just kidding. But anyway, folks, he doesn't like my sweater. Didn't Glenn Beck, I remember when I was in college, I used to go to the movies. And I think Glenn Beck, if I'm not mistaken, he had some kind of like Christmas monologue thing he used to do called the Christmas Sweater or something. I remember, you would go to the movies. I think it was Regal Cinemas. And I would go to the movies. And I remember before the movie, they would advertise, they'd have previews for other movies, but they'd also advertise like special events at Regal Cinema. And like they would like show an opera, right? And it would be like an opera at the New York Metropolitan Opera, but it would be like live streamed. And you could sit in a movie theater and watch the opera. And then I remember, if I'm not mistaken, they had a special event that was around. It was like a monologue by Glenn Beck, the right wing pundit, from television. Originally with CNN and then to Fox, and now on his own he has the Glenn Beck Network or whatever. And it was about the Christmas sweater. And I always thought, who in the world? It's one thing to watch Glenn Beck talk about politics, right? But who in their right mind is going to pay money to watch Glenn Beck talk about the Christmas sweater? I mean, my good, like, that just sounds, they say things are cringe. That sounds cringe, right? Because Glenn Beck, he did the crying thing. Do you remember that? Like, this was the Obama years. So characteristics. I don't know if you remember this. He did the crying thing. Like, he would get on there, and he had this chalkboard he would do, and it was like, this proves that Obama is a communist because he's met with him, he's met with so and so and so and so, and this leads to this and leads to this, and then he would do that. And then I remember, like, he would every so often he would like do this thing where he's just like, I just love America so much, and Barack Obama is a communist, and he's evil, and I love America. And it was like the weirdest thing. Yeah, I'm sitting there, I'm like, this is Fox News, and there's this guy on there crying about how mad he is about Obama and communism or something. And it was weird. It was just really weird. So the story is, apparently Glenn Beck was a cocaine head here in New York. He was like a shock jock in the morning here in New York City, right? As people are driving to work or early in the morning going to work or whatever, he'd be like, "Hello in the morning, I'm a shock jock. I'm gonna make sexual jokes. Yay! What? The early morning radio, the early morning shock jocks, they call them. He was one of those, and he was addicted to cocaine. And then he got sober, he went into recovery. And in his recovery, he converted to being a Mormon. And that's when he got all right wing. So, I don't know. I mean, what in the world was the Christmas? I'm going to look this up. I shouldn't be talking about it right now. They say you shouldn't talk about things you don't know about. I do know about sitting in the theater in college and Glenn Beck being on there and talking about the Christmas sweater. And I mean, like, what in the world was the Christmas sweater? I mean, what was it? I don't know. I mean, was the Christmas sweater like, a sweater that was given to him, and, it proved Barack Obama was a communist, and he lost it before he could prove it on national TV, so he cried, "Oh, I was gonna prove Obama was a communist." I have no idea what the Christmas sweater was, and maybe I'm being deeply insensitive here. Maybe it's some deeply, deeply personal thing to Glenn Beck, and I'm being like a total jerk here. So I shouldn't offend Glenn Beck, who knows? But I just remember sitting there and going, is this for real? Like, people pay money to go into a movie theater to watch Glenn Beck stand at a microphone and talk about his Christmas sweater. I don't know. Sometimes you think about Glenn Beck, and it's like you almost wonder if the guy's kind of like phoning it in a little bit. Hope I don't bother you with this question, but I'm having a hard time understanding the difference between socialism, post-90s, whatever. Well, good for you. Glenn Beck, right? Like, I think I watched his speech to the Conservative Political Action Conference a few years ago. And the guy comes out, and he just starts telling the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I sit there and I'm like, he's just telling Royal Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He's like, and Charlie found the golden ticket, and his grandfather was so happy. And, okay, Eurocommunism. And he's like, he found the golden ticket, and Charlie gave it to his grandfather, and he was so happy. And he's like, at full speed ahead, he's telling the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, okay, this was a book by Roald Dahl for children. This was a movie that was a big hit. I mean, what is this? And he's addressing the Conservative Political Action Conference, and he's just getting one thing, another, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and he's like, and then he ends with the point. The point is, and he's like, and in America, we have the golden ticket. It's the Constitution. And he just starts reciting the Constitution. And the audience are like, oh, they're just loving it. Oh, wow, this is amazing. This is amazing. Like, what if I did that? What if I came on here and I just picked some classic children? I just came on and I was like, now you all remember the Wizard of Oz one time. Why, they were walking up the yellow brick road and I just gave you this whole dramatic telling of the Wizard of Oz. And then I ended by saying, but we have the ruby red slippers here. And it's communism. It's communism. And then you all would just applaud, right? I mean, come on. I mean, he's phoning it in. He's phoning it in. I watched this and I'm like, really? Really? I sat through the entire speech. Is just him telling the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Not his story, by the way. The estate of Roald Dahl should sue him, Glenn Beck. And let me add, Roald Dahl was very anti-Semitic, and Glenn Beck is a big supporter of Israel. So I have a feeling that Roald Dahl would not appreciate Glenn Beck using his story, right? I mean, Roald Dahl was very, very anti-Semitic. Glenn Beck was, there you go. I don't talk about my job. Come on. So then, it's like he made his audience sit through the whole speech of just him telling Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And then he just ends with, and the Constitution is amazing. I mean, that's how it, I mean, it was just, I thought this man is he's phoning it in. This is awful. Another Glenn Beck thing I don't like, right? Another thing about Glenn Beck I don't like is he does this all the time. He comes out and he says, folks, I never prepare for my speeches. I just come out and speak from the heart. No preparation whatsoever. And it's like, first of all, that's not true. Any good orator will plan what they're going to say. Number one. Number two, Glenn Beck tends to have a lot of props in his speeches, right? So he clearly plans what he's going to say if he brings along a boatload of props. So why does he do that? And he comes out and he says, I never plan anything. I just come out here and speak from my heart. And now I'll walk over to my chalkboard, and now I'll walk over to this, rare gun that was... he's lying to his audience. Beck thing was repackaging Alex Jones for Fox News. Maybe so, but he's lying to his audience, right? I mean, why lie? Why lie? A lot of people talk about how Fox News, AM radio, it's like they call it, it's not even really worthy of being called news or political, stuff. There we go, deleted by the Google moderator team. I hope they're liking this. It's not even really news. It's not really political commentary. People call it conservatainment. Conservatainment. I think that's a very accurate description of what it is. Conservatainment. Because it's you can tell that on some level they don't respect their audience. Dinesh D'Souza went to Harvard. He went to Harvard University. And you watch, there's a talk that Dinesh D'Souza gave, it's on C-SPAN, criticizing affirmative action. And, it's a very academic argument. I'm not agreeing with him, obviously, but it's not, it's not anything like what he does now. But now Dinesh D'Souza comes out, and he's like, well, actually, Hillary Clinton is a racist because she's a Democrat. And the Democrats, back in the day of Abraham Lincoln, were racist. And why were the Democrats racist? Well, because they are communists. And communists are racist, just like Adolf Hitler. Yes, and Adolf Hitler was a Marxist, and he was a Democrat. And so Hillary Clinton is a racist. And it's you watch this and you're just anyone with any basic knowledge of history goes, Adolf Hitler hated Marxism and thought Marxism was a Jewish conspiracy. Karl Marx supported the Republicans during the Civil War. What in the world are you talking about? All right. Would you like to be a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast? Absolutely. Absolutely, I would. Ultimate grifter Dave Rubin works for Glenn Beck. I don't know who Dave Rubin is, so I'm not gonna. I'm not sure. I don't know who he is. But I mean, it's just classic, right? But no, I mean, the person asked, would I go on Joe Rogan's podcast? Of course I would. And that's the thing. Like, I debated Stefan Molyneux. I debated Augustus Sol Invictus. And I have absolutely no problem engaging with people with whom I disagree. Bernie Sanders went on the Joe Rogan podcast. Why? Well, maybe folks didn't realize this, but Bernie Sanders was running for president of the United States. He was not running for president of BreadTube. When I saw people going after Bernie Sanders for going on Joe Rogan's podcast, I thought, are you kidding me? Right? There are so many people that it's like it never occurs to them that their leftist politics might actually change things. It's just like, oh, you better not talk to bad people, and Joe Rogan. And what do they not like him? I don't listen to Joe Rogan. I'll just be honest. I know he's one of the most widely listened to podcasts. I've listened to a few of his podcasts, but I'm not like a regular listener. It's not my thing. But I know that he's one of the people we're all supposed to hate. He's on the list of people that if you're a good little progressive Bosch fan, socialist, you're supposed to hate. I'm one of those people too. So that's why I know the list. I think we have meetings, right? I'm always late to the meetings of people. I'm just kidding. But no, there's a list of people that if you're a good liberal, you're supposed to hate. And one of them, socialist nationalism. One of them is Joe Rogan. And it's like Joe Rogan has one of the most widely listened to podcasts in the country. And Bernie Sanders was running for president of the entire country. So why would he not go on there? How do you think H.W. Bush didn't remove Saddam Hussein from power in the Gulf War? This came up in a conversation with my friend about Iraq wars. Okay. Writing it down. Great. Super chat is appreciated. H.W. not remove Saddam. Very good. These are some good super chats. This is going to be a great second half of the show. Can't stand Glenn Beck, right? Actually, I must admit, there's part of me that the reason I can't stand him is because there's part of me that appreciates some of his oratory style. I respect oratory, folks. Anyone who knows me knows that this is a thing about me. I listen to speakers. I listen to speeches all day long. And not just speeches that I agree with. I listen to pastors. I listen to politicians. I love oratory. I love oratory. Right? I just love it. I love oratory. And so I sometimes will really enjoy a Glenn Beck talk. Like, I was making fun of him earlier for a talk, but, there was a moment in a Glenn Beck talk, when you love oratory, you can appreciate things that you disagree with. You're studying the technique, right? It's kind of like looking at a painter or looking at a gymnast or something, and that I can appreciate Glenn Beck's oratory ability. That's why I get annoyed with some of his other stuff. But that's the thing is that, but there you go, folks. That's how it works. And then, but anyway, we're talking about Joe Rogan or something. I would go on Joe Rogan's podcast. Look, Bernie Sanders was not running for president of BreadTube. Bernie Sanders was running for president of the United States. And that meant he had to reach an audience full of people. And that, Joe Rogan has a big audience. He got invited on the podcast. Why wouldn't he go on there? Because Joe Rogan said something bad? Well, I mean, and you'll notice, it's weird, right? So Joe Rogan, I mean, I don't even know that much about him. I mean, Bernie Sanders goes on MSNBC all the time. Bernie Sanders goes on CNN all the time. Bernie Sanders has even gone on Fox News a number of times. So why is that not scandalous? It's like, have you ever noticed that the cancel culture people have this big blank spot for, everything about the American mainstream? I mean, it's supposed to be a scandal. A scandal if anyone supports anyone in China or supports any government around the world that's anti-imperialist. But no one points out that all the people who voted for Joe Biden we're voting for somebody who voted for the Iraq War. Right? If that's cancelable, I mean, what's more cancelable than the Iraq War? The USA invades Iraq, blows the country to shreds with shock and awe, destroys the infrastructure, kills hundreds of thousands of people, and the country hasn't been stable ever since. I mean, the country has been unstable ever since. There's been massive instability. Since the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, the country has been in shambles and been ruined and been unstable. Millions of lives are destroyed, if not millions of people directly dead. Why is it not cancelable to associate with somebody who is an Iraq War supporter? Right? I mean, why is that not a cancelable offense? I mean, it's Joe Biden supported the war in Iraq, was a big supporter of it, went around saying there were weapons of mass destruction when there weren't any. Why is that not a cancelable offense? Right? I mean, if we're supposed to cancel anyone who talked to so-and-so, who shook hands with so-and-so, if Bernie is supposed to be canceled for going on Joe Rogan, why is all the people that are voting for Joe Biden now not canceled? Is BDS hypocritical? BDS hypocritical. Alrighty. Okay. Explain that to me. Or here's one. And I'm just going to throw this out there. I tweeted this, and it got an interesting reaction. And I say this, by the way, as somebody who loves Angela Davis. Angela Davis's writing. There are YouTube clips of Angela Davis speaking on my channel. I love Angela Davis. I don't think Angela Davis should be canceled. I love Angela Davis. But I'm just going to bring this up to point out the hypocrisy. Right? So the argument about why I, Caleb Maupin, should be canceled is because I met with a Russian intellectual by the name of Alexander Dugin. That's why I should be canceled. That's why I should be toxic, and I should no one should ever be seen with me or ever read anything I've ever written or anything. That's why I'm pure evil, according to, the character Assassins. However, Angela Davis, who is awesome, is one of the most well-loved left-wing anti-racist writers, was friends with Reverend Jim Jones, the People's Temple Kool-Aid Man, right? Movement. Focus on Palestine. All right. Oh, I'm glad you enjoy it, Jazz. So, folks, the People's Temple guy, Reverend Jim Jones, not only was he a sexual predator, and not only did he prey on members of his congregation sexually, not only that, not only did he physically abuse people, not only did he sexually molest a man in front of his whole congregation once, he led a mass suicide in which 918 people died. Reverend Jim Jones is probably one of the most universally recognized baddies in American history, right? There are a few people that all Americans will agree are bad. Serial killers, axe murderers. Reverend Jim Jones, the leader of the People's Temple, he is one of the people that basically everyone agrees is a baddie. He is Reverend Jim Jones, right? Reverend Jim Jones, not only was he a rapist, not only was he physically abusing people in his church, not only was he a molester, he then led a mass suicide in Guyana where 918 American citizens killed themselves. That was the biggest mass death of Americans prior to 9/11. Now, Angela Davis went to his church a number of times, spoke at his church a number of times. She even went over to his apartment, hung out with him. She made statements supporting them that were read over the speakers in Jonestown. Why did she do that? Well, it was her job, right? Because Angela Davis was the leader of the Communist Party USA, and Reverend Jim Jones was a minister in San Francisco who had a lot of influence among the San Francisco Democratic Party And Reverend Jim Jones was pro-Soviet. He praised the Soviet Union. So Angela Davis, it was her job, right? She was the leader of the Communist Party. She was the most outspoken pro-Soviet academic in the United States at the time, philosophy professor. And Reverend Jim Jones led a church that was mainly black attendees. The majority of the church were African American, even though Reverend Jim Jones was white. And he was going around saying good things about the Soviet Union. And I think they even purchased some land in the Soviet Union. So Angela Davis was going to have to go there and shake some hands and talk to people, right? If she hadn't done that, she would not be doing her job. So it makes sense that Angela Davis had to talk to Jim Jones, right? You know, anybody who was doing what Jim Jones was going to do, right? And of course, she didn't know they were going to commit mass suicide, but there's a big church in San Francisco that has a lot of influence in San Francisco politics, and the pastor is very, very pro-Soviet, and you are the most outspoken black pro-Soviet intellectual. You're going to go to some events and shake some hands and press the flesh and talk. So Angela Davis had to hang out with Reverend Jim Jones a little bit. Not just a little bit. She shouldn't be canceled for that. No, she didn't know Reverend Jim Jones was going to commit mass suicide. She didn't know that. Right? Well, if Angela Davis is not canceled for hanging out with Jim Jones, why in the world am I canceled for hanging out with a guy in Russia who writes books? Right? I'm just telling you, right? If it's okay to hang out with a guy who, you know, led a mass suicide of 918 people, but it's not okay to hang out with a Russian guy who wrote some books. Come on, folks. But I've talked about this. That was in my whole debate with Vosh. That was one of the main points I made, which is that, you know, Vosh's fans and Vosh himself are the biggest hypocrites with this cancel culture stuff, because Vosh always wanks about how much he loves the Black Panthers. I love the Black Panthers. They're amazing. I love the Black Panthers. Look at me. I'm so anti-racist. I love the Black Panthers. But anyone who supports North Korea or anyone who supports China is an evil Nazbol tanky. The Black Panthers supported China, supported North Korea, got money from Gaddafi in Libya. The Black Panthers were about as tanky as you can get. But Vosh doesn't cancel them. Why? Because it's trendy now, right? They make PBS documentaries and all that. If the Black Panthers were still around, Vosh would hate them. Vosh would be denouncing them up and down if they were still around. But because the Black Panther Party was destroyed, you know, because now it's just nostalgia, right? Oh, I love the Black Panthers. You know, he loves the Black Panthers, right? Because you're supposed to love the Black Panthers, right? Because they're dead and gone, and they make documentaries about them on PBS, and liberal academics write books about them, so he loves them. And he just conveniently ignores the fact that the Black Panthers were about as gosh darn tanky as you can get, right? Special relationship with North Korea, right? Sent delegations to North Korea, studied Kim Il-sung's ideology, had the Little Red Book, Mao's Little Red Book, as required teaching. Right? Yeah. Big pictures of Lenin in their offices. Big pictures of Mao in their offices. Watch the speeches of Fred Hampton. Right? You know, just saying, folks, the hypocrisy. Cancel culture is loaded with hypocrisy. Right? It's loaded with hypocrisy. Vosh will never cancel the Black Panthers, but he'll cancel anybody now who dares defend the record of socialism and socialism's history around the world. The Black Panthers were as tanky as you can get. Albert Einstein was a tanky, right? Look at what Albert Einstein said about the Soviet Union, about Lenin, about Stalin. Albert Einstein was a tanky. Langston Hughes was a tanky. Helen Keller was a tanky. Read what Helen Keller said. You know, all kinds of great progressive people. W.E.B. Du Bois, tanky. W.E.B. Du Bois praised China and Mao, met with Mao. Not only did he do that, he praised the overthrow of the Dalai Lama in Tibet. There's a great recording of him talking about that. He praised China's intervention in Tibet. When China was freeing slaves, he said, freeing the slaves of Tibet. So you're going to cancel W.E.B. Du Bois? No, we're just not going to talk about that. We're just not going to talk about that. Right. Meanwhile, does anybody ever cancel the Iraq War? I mean, I'm sorry. The invasion of Iraq, the unilateral U.S. invasion of Iraq, was one of the greatest acts of mass murder in modern history. A whole country blown to bits and destroyed by imperialism. Unbelievable, massive criminal atrocity. Nobody ever gets canceled for associating with Nancy Pelosi. The Bush administration endorsed Joe Biden practically. So, think about that the next time the cancel culture crowd starts in. So there you go. All right, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Let's do our roll call. Wilmington, Delaware. Los Angeles. David in Italy. JT24 in Mississippi. Springfield, Missouri. USA. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. Austin, Belize, Joey. Max the Sax in Virginia. Mekti in St. Louis, Missouri. Rafael in Brazil. Salt Lake City. Ramiro, good friend in East LA. Washington State, Clydebank, Alberta, Canada, Wilmington, California, Alex in Salem, Oregon, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio, Ellie from California, on the road in Australia, says David Fox, Terre Haute, Indiana, Los Angeles, Daniel in Los Angeles, Eugene Debs, somewhere USA, Kendall in San Diego, Marxist Cat Girl, New Zealand, Kentucky, Tom in Pennsylvania, Robert in Hawaii, Chicago, Johnny in Olympia, Southwest UK, Love and Optimism, Missouri by way of Northern California, Steve in Alberta, Canada, Las Vegas, deep in the country, the Chocolate Factory, Auckland, New Zealand, Tempe, Arizona, somewhere USA, Brooklyn, New York City, Treasure Coast, Florida, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, Union, New Jersey, Queens, New York City, Lloyd Bennett, Oakland, California, home of the Black Panthers, Sacramento, Mohsen from Iran, Don in Ireland, Ghent in Belgium, Queens, New York, Christian in Indiana, Jess in Oregon, Hot Springs, Arkansas, Vallejo, California, Jason Sarna, St. David's, Bermuda, Tully, Australia, Love My Sweater, Albany, New York City, Richie in Staten Island, Arkansas, Anna in Des Moines, Iowa, Rio de Janeiro, Petaluma, California, George in Manhattan, roll call, opting out, Don from Phoenixville, Langley, Henderson, Nevada, Cape Canaveral, Florida, Nate from my boss's office in Sydney, Langley, Virginia, Hay from Ecuador, Manhattan, New York City, Arkansas, represent. What do you see? You see what Arkansas. South Carolina, Naples, Florida, Harold Sullivan, Tom Servo. Very, very good. Very, very good. Who else is with us tonight? Names and locations. Leipzig, East Germany, Etatist. Chaska is with us tonight. Sham from Cleveland Wasteland. Kieran from Work San Fiego. Alrighty, folks. Glad you are with us. Glad you are with us. Dante from Southern California. Very, very good. Very, very good. Anyone else, folks? Anyone else? Jack from Tau. Alex from Calebistan. All right. Northern California. Woodstock, New York. Parker from Turlock, California. Edmonton, Alberta. Very good. Very, very good. Who else is with us tonight? A little place called Hope. Google Offices, says Harold Sullivan. Lovely. Lovely. That was entertaining, wasn't it? Jack, okay. Santiago de Chile. Out on a limb. Dresden. Alrighty, folks. Dallas, Texas. Very good. Very, very good. All right, folks, if you've got more Super Chat questions, keep them rolling in. I am always happy to answer your Super Chat questions. And we are just going to hammer them out one by one. Alrighty. Alrighty. First super chat question was about the Zapatistas and Marcos. Right? Well, the Zapatistas were an indigenous group in Chiapas, and they still are around. They're an indigenous activist group in Chiapas, Mexico. They are fighting for the rights of indigenous people in that region of Mexico. And they are anti-capitalist. Sometimes they are inspired by Marxism. Other times they're inspired by more anarchist ideas. I believe the founder was a guy they called Subcomandante Marcos. And they are a revolutionary trend in Mexico. And they exist. They have a lot of academics who really like them. I think they have a lot of academic programs where people from Europe and people from the United States go and study their ideas. Yeah, I mean, they are a revolutionary trend in Mexico. Interesting fact, AMLO, the president of Mexico, Lopez Obrador, is not congratulating Joe Biden and is with Trump. He says that it looks like there was election fraud. That's big. Lopez Obrador is not congratulating Joe Biden. Maduro, Evo Morales, all of them congratulated Joe Biden, but not Lopez Obrador. That is fascinating to me. That is fascinating. And it's not getting a lot of attention in the media. But yes, AMLO is not supporting Donald Trump, which is is not supporting Joe Biden, which is fascinating to me. All right, general strike. Is it a good strategy? I don't think so. There's actually a book by Rosa Luxemburg on this question. It's called Mass Strike. And that for a long time, the syndicalist movement, the syndicalist wing of the revolutionary anti-capitalist movement, the wing of anti-capitalism that opposed all political action, focused simply on the job action. Syndicalists, they talked about the great general strike that would happen and that would bring down capitalism. There'd be one day, none of the workers would go to work, and that would be the revolution. And Rosa Luxemburg wrote a pamphlet called Mass Strike, where she talked about, mass strikes can be a good thing, mass protests can be a good thing, but they in and of themselves aren't revolutionary, because the goal of a revolution is to seize control of state power. That a mass strike in and of itself is not a revolution. Now, what's interesting is we've never had a nationwide general strike, but we have had municipal general strikes throughout the United States, where cities are basically shut down. There was the Seattle general strike of 1919. In 1934, there was a general strike in San Francisco started by the dock workers. There was a general strike in Minneapolis, started by the Teamsters, truck drivers, and they were Trotskyites. And there was a general strike in Toledo, Ohio in 1934. There were 3 general strikes in major cities in 1934. Then there was a general strike in Oakland, California in 1947. And that does not get talked about a lot. It gets overlooked in a lot of major history. The Nazgul faction. Yep, me and the Dark Lord of Mordor. But yeah, gets overlooked. So, general strikes on a municipal level in cities, they have happened here in the United States. But we've never really had a nationwide general strike like they have in France and places like that. And it's interesting because the very strange syndicalist George Sorel, he talked about the general strike as an inspirational myth, right? That he said that this great general strike that has never happened anywhere, that syndicalists always talk about, maybe it'll never happen, but it's a beautiful myth. And his writing about the power of myth, George Sorel goes on and on about the general strike as this kind of apocalyptic myth that inspires the revolutionary syndicalist movement, which I think is interesting. But Rosa Luxemburg, others, they critiqued the great mass strike theory that seems to be promoted, right? That one day the workers will all just go on strike and that'll be the end of capitalism. The industrial workers of the world, the IWW, promoted that. And it's not correct, right? The struggle of the working class is to seize political power. It's not a struggle to simply go on strike and refuse to work and have direct action on the job. But that was a big current. Syndicalism was very much based on the general strike theory. So I guess that probably answers that question. All righty. Free trade and socialism. Well, that's a good point, right? At the end of the day, socialism does not favor free trade, right? Free trade, at the end of the day, it drives wages down, and it creates a situation where labor protections are not allowed to be enacted by governments, right? If a government enacts labor protection, they get fined under free trade treaties like the World Trade Organization, like NAFTA. That a lot of times free trade treaties, are very bad for the working class, and they weaken the power of organized labor. However, many people will point out that Karl Marx believed in free trade. And what that is that Karl Marx was a critic of economic nationalism. He did not believe that countries should try to simply have an economy within their own borders. So Karl Marx also believed that capitalism expanding on a global level would lead to global socialist revolution. So many people will point to Karl Marx's critique of economic protectionism and economic nationalism and say Karl Marx believed in free trade. That's kind of true. But nowadays, socialists are the primary critics of free trade. You'll notice, at one point, there were the World Social Forums that were happening. There was one in Venezuela. There were these global gatherings of the anti-globalization movement. And Hugo Chavez was very supportive of them, and they had them in India, and they had them in South America, and there was the U.S. Social Forums for a while, and the Social Forum movement was kind of an anti-globalization gathering, and communists were heavily involved in that, for sure. Soros was also, and that's really bizarre because Soros was a big supporter of free trade in the 90s, but then later he started backing anti-free trade protests and stuff, so it's all a little bit complicated, but the anti-free trade movement is generally a movement that communists at this point support. They're not protectionists, right? They're not protectionists in the sense that they want economic nationalism, but they tend to favor governments enacting policies. So there you go. Loved your Low Society episode. Would love to see you have a conversation with Bay Area 415 or Paul Morin. I would talk to both of them. And that's actually, someone else asked about Bay Area 415. And I'm going to be mentioning that when I get to that super chat question. But thank you very much. All righty. Trotskyist organizations, their problems. Well, yes. The Kent State. All right. I've talked about that before, but I'll talk about it again. The biggest problem that Trotskyite organizations have is that Trotskyism basically says that what the Bolsheviks did in July of 1917 is what all communists should do all the time. Right? In July of 1917, Lenin was trying to form a united front. The Bolsheviks were trying to lead a united front that would overthrow capitalism. And so they were trying to break with any bourgeois parties, but unite all the working class parties around a program, all power to the Soviets. And they wanted to build a united front of all working class parties. They didn't want to align with any bourgeois parties, but they also wanted to unify all the working class parties, right? And so that was the theory of the united front. The thing is that there are instances where there are divisions in the ruling class, where it is strategic for the working class to align with one faction of the ruling class against another, right? And that even happened in the Russian Revolution, the defeat of the Kornilov reaction, which is a very big part of the Russian Revolution. And on top of that, there are also instances where it is necessary to focus on ideological struggles within the working class movement, right? That in the lead up to World War I, for example, the Social Democrats who were supporting World War I were in the working class movement, but it was necessary to expose them. Right. So then later, when the Communist International was being very, very, very hostile to the Social Democrats, calling them social fascists, Trotsky said, you're supposed to be calling for a united front. When the Communist International formed, the Popular Front against fascism, the United Front against fascism, aligning with capitalists against fascists, Trotsky said, you're not supposed to do that. Well, Trotskyism is premised on this idea that what the Bolsheviks did in the lead up to the Russian Revolution is what all communist parties should do all the time, and that's not correct. I think one of the other problems that Trotskyite groups have is they tend to not really be anti-imperialist at the end of the day. In the name of, the class line, right? And they'll say the class line. Oh, it's the class line. They've never seen a CIA color revolution that they don't like. Whenever, there's an anti-imperialist country and the U.S. imperialists are stirring up discontent, they always support it. And they support it on the grounds. They'll even admit, sometimes you can press them, and they'll even admit that it is an imperialist revolt, but they argue it'll open space for a workers' movement, right? The CIA is staging a color revolution in Iran. At first, the Trotskyists will say, no, the Iranian people just want freedom, blah, 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 blah. And you'll prove to them then that this is backed by imperialism. Then they'll say, well, that's okay because it's creating space for the workers, right? And that they often do this. Trotskyist groups, in the name of the class line, they're not really anti-imperialist, right? And they will support, whether it's Libya, whether it's Syria, all the color revolutions across Eastern Europe, they will support it on the grounds that it opens space. And that's at the time the Soviet Union was falling. All across Eastern Europe, country after country was being overthrown, socialism was being overthrown, free market capitalism was coming in, and the Trotskyites were all applauding. They were applauding for the fall of socialist governments because they said, oh no, it's not socialism that's falling, it's just the Stalinist apparatus, and now real communism will come in. That didn't happen. Not in any of those countries did real communism come out of the fall of the Soviet Union. The color revolutions did not create real communism. They created predatory, undemocratic, neoliberal free market capitalism. And the sex trafficking came in, and the heroin trade came in, and it was a disaster. But the Trots on this class line, we always support an uprising if workers are involved in it, right? And they argued, it's good that the Stalinist bureaucracy will be weakened. And the other thing, somebody actually thought it might be a funny prank to do, to dress like Borat and go to a Trotskyist event, right? And do like the Borat thing and pretend you're like a true revolutionary from Syria. Because I swear, at the time, in Syria, the civil war, right? It's very clear the people who want to overthrow Assad are Wahhabis. Right? And they want, to establish a government that is in line with Wahhabism. They're working for the U.S. imperialists to overthrow the Syrian Ba'athist Arab socialist government. And they want to establish, the rule of Western capitalism in Syria and Islamic sectarian violence. But, if you press these Trotskyists, they always say, we don't support the Wahhabis that are against Assad. We support the independent revolutionary workers movement against Assad. The independent revolutionary workers movement, it doesn't exist, right? The Communist Party of Syria supports Assad, right? The Communist Party of Syria, Bakdash, supports Assad. The trade unions in Syria support Assad. They know the people trying to overthrow Assad will make their lives worse. They may have their criticisms of the Syrian government. There's plenty of criticisms to be made of the Syrian government, but they know that the forces trying to overthrow them are not good. But American Trotskyists have it in their minds that no, wanting a Huawei phone. I own them. They're amazing. Yeah, I agree. I love Huawei. In fact, I'll write that down. I'll write down Huawei. But they always insist, no, we don't support the Wahhabis in Syria. We support the, revolutionary workers movement. And, So I always thought it might be funny to have someone dress up like Borat and go to a Trotskyist meeting and say, I represent the Revolutionary Workers' Committee of Syria against both Assad and the Wahhabis, and pretend you are one of them and see how they react. Because it's ridiculous, right? It's absolutely ridiculous, right? There is no third pole in Syria. There is no third pole in Libya, right? There is no third pole in any color revolution. When the U.S. imperialists are trying to destabilize a country and overthrow it, and there's not a magical Trotskyite third pole, but they always think there is, right? They're always, in Iran, in Venezuela, right? We're not for Maduro, but we're also not for the U.S. imperialists. We're for the magic revolutionary Trotskyist third pole. So I swear that someone should do this, right? Do a hidden camera thing, dress up like Borat, and call yourself the magical third pole. And go to a Trotskyist meeting and say, I am from Venezuela. I am not for Maduro. I am not for U.S. imperialists. I am revolutionary Trotskyist of Venezuela. And see if they're stupid enough to believe you. Because it's so ridiculous, right? Whenever the U.S. imperialists are attacking a country, the Trotskyists are always on the side of the West. Exactly. Whenever the imperialists are attacking a country and have their guns aimed at it, the Trotskyites always find this magical third pole, which allows them to then go to the anti-regime protests being paid for by the CIA. It is so, so annoying. right? It is ridiculous. When it really gets down to it, they're cowards. They're cowards. That's really all it's about. They don't want to actually stick up for somebody that US media says is the bad guy. That's really all it's about. That's really all it's about. They don't want to stick up for somebody when US media says that someone's a bad guy and everyone says, "You're a socialist. Do you support evil Assad?" They want to go, oh no, I'm not like that. That's what it is. They're punks. They're just punks. They're not revolutionary. They're not acting out the class line. They're punks. They're just a bunch of little punks. That's all they are. In Syria, in Libya, oh no, we're not for Gaddafi. We're for the magical, like, revolutionary workers movement to bring down Gaddafi. Shut up, you punks. You paved the way. You paved the way for the destruction of Libya. Now there's slave markets in Libya. The revolution that you supported was lynching dark-skinned African guest workers. Shame on you, Trotskyites, for supporting the Libyan revolution. Oh, but we didn't support the mobs of lynchers. We supported the Revolutionary Libyan Workers Combat Fight Back League. It didn't exist. It didn't exist. It made it up. You made it up, you punks. You're too scared to actually expose the U.S. imperialists for what they're doing. You're too scared to do that. So you made some kind of magical leap and backflip in a way that, I can say I'm a communist, but support the U.S. imperialists, and that way I'll fit in with everybody, and no one will think you're a punk. You're a punk. That's all you are, is you're a punk, right? Every single one of these trot groups, every single one of them, ISO and QWH and XYZ, Trotskyism's imperialism with revolutionary aesthetics. Exactly, right? The international Marxist tendency, when Libya was having a CIA color revolution, right, that was being supported by CNN and cheered on. Every single one of these revolutionaries, they're so badass. We're so revolutionary. We're so much more revolutionary than you. Every single one of them went along with it and cheered for the lynch mobs that were lynching African guest workers and paved the way for the intervention. And as soon as the cruise missiles started falling, they said, we don't support the cruise missiles. And they put it like a very vague statement, like, we don't support the bombing. Yeah, you did. You paved the way for your bombing. You paved the way for the bombing by giving political support and left cover to the CIA color revolution. They're punks is what they are. Trotskyites are a bunch of punks. They're a bunch of cowards and punks, right? They're interested in Marxism. They're interested in socialism. They don't have any courage to stand against imperialism. When the rubber meets the road, all of a sudden, they're with the imperialists. Bidenism is liberalism with brunch characteristics. Very good. That's what they are. That's what Trotskyites are. That's what Trotskyites are. And they should be ashamed of themselves. Right? Trotskyites, they're for revolution until one actually happens, and then they declare it to be Stalinism. They're against counter-revolution until one actually happens, and then all of a sudden they do a leap and a backflip to support it, like they did all across Eastern Europe. Trotskyites are communists who just always manage to get things exactly wrong to serve U.S. foreign policy. And I'm not fans of theirs. I'm not fans of theirs at all. Probably got a little too heated there, but it annoys me. I'm sorry. I think about Libya. I think about Libya and what was done to Libya and how, like, even people in tanky groups were punks. I mean, it was unbelievable to me. I was sitting there watching it. It was like common sense to me. Libya, socialist, anti-imperialist country that gave weapons to the IRA, that supported the Black Panthers. And the U.S. imperialists are trying to overthrow it, and everyone's like, we don't like Gaddafi. It was unbelievable to me. Unbelievable to me. Way too many punks calling themselves socialists. Way, way, way too many punks. All right. Enough about that. Alrighty, sex work and socialism. Well, there have been socialist countries that have outlawed sex work, and there have been socialist countries that have not. First of all, whether or not a country has sex work is not a question of whether or not it is socialist. So that's the first thing, right? At one point, people tried to tell me Cuba was not socialist because it had, quote unquote, prostitution there. Well, no, a country can be socialist and have prostitution, right? A country can be, and then other people have said to me, well, the Soviet Union wasn't socialist because they outlawed prostitution. Well, no. A country can be socialist, that whether or not a country does this is not a question of whether or not it's socialist. We're at risk of being uncritical towards China in a similar way to communists treated the USSR prior to Khrushchev. Communists are at risk of being uncritical towards China. Uncritical to China. Alrighty. But let's talk about this. My position on sex work, which is this is one of these issues that no matter what you say, you make a lot of people mad. And that there is nuance here, right? Because there is insensitivity on both sides of this issue. So first thing first, I don't think sex work should be criminalized. I think people should be free to do sex work, right? That is the right of anybody, really. If they want to do that kind of work and get paid for it, I don't think the state should stop them. I don't think they should face any punishment for doing it. However, as long as they really want to do it and they're not compelled by economic means, they're not compelled by anyone else to do it. If people of their own free will want to engage in sex work, they have that right, and the government shouldn't stop them, and that's that. However, and this is the important part, is that the overwhelming majority of people that are involved in sex work around the world are not doing it of their own free will. For most people in the world that are involved in sex work, prostitution, it's a horror. It is an absolute horror. Okay? The sex trade, pimps, human trafficking. I mean, prostitution around the world is a horrific thing. So communists, while we should always be favoring the right of people to, in my view, to do that, if they choose to do it of their own free will, without any compulsion, economic or otherwise, fully consensually, if they make the choice that that's what they want to do and they do it, that's their business, on the one hand. On the other hand, we must acknowledge the actual horror that sex trafficking and, human slavery and all of that is, okay? And I see, on the one hand, I see people who say, you know what, sex trafficking and all that is such a horror and we should outlaw all sex work. Well, for people who it isn't that, no. However, I do hear a lot of the other side too. I hear people say, well, hey, there are women who do this of their own free will, so we should just go around saying sex work is amazing, we support sex workers. No. Right? You can be for the decriminalization and the rights of people to consensually do that kind of activity, but you have to be sensitive to the actual reality of what that kind of work is for most people who engage in it. Most people engage in it, it's not of their free will. They're economically compelled. In a lot of cases, they're not even just economically compelled. There's a gun held to their head, there's a pimp, there's violence, there's organized crime, and that if people over-glorify voluntary sex work, they can be deeply insensitive to the other reality. And in a lot of working class communities, if communists go around and are like, hey, we love sex work, did I mention that we're the people that believe in sex work? A lot of people in working class communities and immigrant communities are going to say, you disgust me. Because for them, they have seen in their neighborhoods and in their communities what sex work is, and they're disgusted by it. So it is insensitive to just go around talking about sex work like it's this great thing, right? But at the same time, actual consensual sex work among people that are not compelled to do it, that's a different issue. So that is my nuanced position on the sex worker question. And it's one of those issues that makes a lot of people mad. But at the end of the day, that's my position, right? And yeah, there you go. Right? There you go. All right. David Lynch, I'm not familiar enough with his films. I can't really give you an answer. I really hate it when someone gives me a super chat and I can't give them an answer. But, I'm not familiar enough with David Lynch's work. What is the opportunity for real change, right? And the person was a pessimist. The opportunity for real change is ideological. We need to ideologically change things. People do not understand socialism in the United States right now. People are in the streets, they're organizing, people want change more than ever, and we need to get a genuine socialist program to people. We need the Center for Political Innovation. We need people to understand that socialism will make their lives better. Will make their lives better. We need a government of action to fight for working families. That is what we need right now. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need people to understand that socialism is not going to destroy America. Socialism is going to save America from the horrors of capitalism. And America will be reborn on new foundations beyond slavery and segregation and colonialism, on new foundations of brotherhood and sisterhood and solidarity, and that we need a constructive socialist message. We need a revamping, reinvention of socialism. Right now, the synthetic left, the destructive, pessimistic forces have hijacked socialism. And the Center for Political Innovation is about trying to take it back and trying to bring back the actual socialism that turned Russia and China into superpowers, that defeated the Nazis, that conquered outer space. We need actual socialism right now, not the synthetic, destructive left. And so that's what the Center for Political Innovation is all about. And we're already doing it, folks. We're already doing it. I mean, it's amazing. The amount of people contacting me, the amount of people that want to get involved. I mean, the amount of people. We're having a web conference coming up this Saturday. The link is about to be up. We already had one web conference. We published 2 books already that are selling like crazy. We've got people all across the country. We've got people in other countries that are approaching me about forming centers for political innovation in their country. I mean, we are at the beginning of something really, really exciting here. It's going to be difficult to set it all up and get it all going. But we are building a movement for real constructive socialism. And it's happening. And if you want to get involved, send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com. Let's make it happen, because we are at the beginning of something really, 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 really exciting. There's plenty to be optimistic about, but we can't do it with the synthetic left. I mean, the woke mobs are not going to make socialism. The woke mobs are not going to make socialism. It's going to take an ideological revamping of the left, right? We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Judicial system. So there we go. Alrighty. Great. Appreciating the super chats, folks. Always a pleasure. All right. Bay Area 415. Well, I was on a stream with him, actually, on election night. I did a stream. It was with Mango Press. And he was on there, and I was on there. Bay Area 415. He is a pro-China commentator. And he has a Marxist perspective, but he always covers his face, and he always is jarbled when he talks. And I guess that's because he has a very prominent job or something, and so he doesn't want people to know who he is. But yeah, I would stream with him. I would stream with him. I will say that, you know, the covering of the face and the jarbling of the voice is makes me a little nervous, honestly. Makes me a little bit nervous, but you know, I mean, he's doing great work defending China. You know, I don't agree with everything he says. He doesn't agree with everything I say, and that's okay. People can disagree, but there you go. Alrighty. Black-owned businesses. You know, well, the Buy Black campaigns, that's been a big thing to black nationalists for a long time. Minister Louis Farrakhan and others have pushed the idea that, you know, the black community spends its money outside of the community. And that's actually, you know, the idea of black capitalism, spending your money at black-owned businesses. That's a long-standing black nationalist trend. And I would support that. I would support that, you know, for any community, right? You know, if any group of colonized people were saying we want to engage in some kind of economic nationalism, I would support their right to do that. I would never condemn them for doing that. There are some voices in the black community that don't think that's the answer, that favor class struggle rather than just buy black. But, you know, I would support the right of any, you know, person within a colonized community, any person within an oppressed nation to make that tactical decision. So, you know, it's not particularly new. The black-owned business thing is not a particularly new thing. And, I mean, I'm not black. I'm a white guy. So, you know, it's not for me to say what the black community should do. But, you know, I respect the right of the black community to make that decision. If they want to strategically buy black, that's their business, and I respect their right to do that. All righty. All right. Will fascism in the United States be anti-Asian or anti-Semitic? Neither and both. right? I mean, that fascism, you have to understand that fascism is not an ideology. Fascism is an action. It is a campaign of violence and terror that involves beating people down and destroying things in the hope of saving capitalism, right? Fascism is a movement of destruction and synthetic left. It is a movement of destruction, violence, and terror, and it's a mobilization of the population around violence, terror, and destruction in the hopes of saving capitalism. That is what fascism is, and they use all kinds of different rhetoric to motivate people to do it. And they target all kinds of different groups for that destruction. So, at the end of the day, I don't know. I mean, anti-China, demagogy is big right now. Anti-Semitism is certainly bigger on the internet than I've ever seen it. But I mean, there's also anti-immigrant bigotry. And that fascism as a current, right? It's just about saving capitalism with mass destruction, and trying to stabilize a capitalist economy by beating people down and destroying things, right? It's the way Hitler, saved the German economy by putting half the country in concentration camps and the other half in military uniforms. That's fascism. And it can target all kinds of communities, and it can use all kinds of rhetoric to justify itself. And we need to have a scientific understanding of fascism, not an aesthetic understanding of fascism like Susan Sontag, where fascism is anything that makes her uncomfortable or scares her, or it's, gymnastics or whatever. But, fascism, and it's not a synonym for authoritarian government, it is an economic mode of trying to save capitalism. It's a form of Bonapartism, of capitalist Bonapartism, in which the state and there's a mass mobilization for destruction. That's what fascism is, and whatever rhetoric or whatever group it targets might change. Great leap forward. Yeah, well, in China, there was the Great Leap Forward. That was after the Sino-Soviet split in the early '60s. China and the Soviet Union had a falling out. They were not getting along with each other anymore. And China felt like it was going to prove to, the Soviet Union that they were like ultra revolutionary, right? The Soviet Union, they argued, were revisionists. They had sold out communism, so they were going to be the true ultra revolutionary communists. And it didn't work out too well. Part of the reason it didn't work out too well is the Soviet Union pulled out its aid. Like, buildings were left half built. Engineers, technicians sent from the Soviet Union to China left, and so it caused some economic problems. But also, I mean, there were problematic policies in the Great Leap Forward. I mean, Mao even got up and said they had to stop their economic programs and completely reinvent themselves. The Great Leap Forward was not good. Now, one thing I will say is that, I mean, there were deaths. There was a famine as a result of the Great Leap Forward. I mean, there was a famine there was some natural disasters, and then the economic problems of the Great Leap Forward compounded the disasters, and it made things very bad. The Great Leap Forward is the subject of all kinds of anti-communist literature and writing. Meanwhile, prior to the Chinese Communist Party coming to power in the 1920s, there were all kinds of famines in which millions of people died. In fact, China used to have a mass famine every decade or so. There would be a mass famine in China in which millions of Chinese people would die from malnutrition. None of those famines get anywhere near the attention the Great Leap Forward gets. The Great Leap Forward gets a huge amount of attention because it has political value. It can be blamed on the Chinese Communist Party. They can say, see, communism's bad. But before the revolution, when China was under the control of British capitalism, when it didn't develop its own economy, they would have famines all the time. And part of the reason they had famines was because places that should have been growing food were growing opium poppies, right? 1928, Edgar Snow was living in China, and he was blown away at the mass starvation that he saw. And he couldn't believe it, that there were whole sections of China where people were literally starving to death in huge numbers. And he said to himself, he said, why don't people rise up and revolt? Read what Edgar Snow, I mean, this is the 1920s. There were famines happening all the time, mass starvation, no strong central government to make the famines stop. Opium poppies being sold, children being sold into prostitution so they could eat. It was, horrendous stuff was happening because of capitalism in China. But none of that stuff has any political value, right? The Great Leap Forward was a horrendous thing, and a lot of people died because of problematic economic policies. And, you know, I don't do Dugan questions. But regardless, um, regardless, right? It doesn't have political value, right? The Great Leap Forward has political value, but all the famines that were caused by capitalism in China, they did an estimate, right? And they estimated that because of the Opium Wars, in which Hong Kong was seized, in which China was not able to develop its own industries, there's almost 100 million Chinese people that probably died between the Opium Wars and the 1949 Communist Revolution. The economic destruction of China, the economic plundering of China, the inability of China to develop its own industries, the mass famines in China that resulted from British domination probably killed 100 million people. But none of that gets tallied and none of that gets added up because, capitalism doesn't kill people, but the Great Leap Forward, is all purely the fault of communism. When communism is what cured starvation in China. The reason that there is not starvation in China today is because of communism. Right? It's communism that industrialized China. It's communism that built China's agricultural system. It's communism that built, the power plants in China and electrified China. It's communism that is wiping out poverty in Tibet with poverty alleviation programs and building highways. And so communism has made China the second largest economy in the world. But yes, was there a famine during the Great Leap Forward in the early 60s? You betcha. So therefore, communism failed because of this famine. Meanwhile, under capitalism in China, there were famines all the time. It's an unfair narrative. It's a completely unfair narrative. And it drives me crazy. I argued with Stefan Molyneux about this, right? It's a ridiculous narrative. British free market capitalism killed millions of people in Asia, killed millions of people in Africa, killed millions of people in India, killed millions of people in Latin America. Everywhere. All throughout the 1800s, millions of people were dying because of British free market capitalism. In Ireland, for Christ's sakes, the potato famine, right? Free market policies have killed millions and millions and millions of people all over the world, but no one ever blamed. There's no death toll for that. But then they throw out some body count for communism. It's very annoying. Alrighty. Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is a TV network that is funded by the Qatari monarchy. It tends to reflect the viewpoints of the Muslim Brotherhood wing of international Islam. Right? It's like you have Wahhabi Islam from Saudi Arabia. You have Shia Islam, which tends to be aligned with Iran, though it's a sliding scale. Not all Shia love Iran. There's differences among Shia about Iran. And then you have what they call westernized or modernist Islam, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. Al Jazeera, the Qatari monarchy, they tend to put out the line of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood also has a lot of influence in Turkey. And that's Al Jazeera. And they tend to be very critical of Trump. They tend to align with like liberals in the United States and such, but they also tend to be very, very, very pro-imperialist in Syria and anti-Iran. They favor negotiating with Iran. They're not in favor of like a new Cold War, and they're critical of Saudi Arabia. But yeah, they represent that particular axis in the Middle East, the Qatari, Qatar, Turkey, Muslim Brotherhood axis, which is a very influential wing in Islam, right? You have the Wahhabi wing of the Saudis, and then you have the Turkey and Qatar wing, and that's Al Jazeera. And anti-China, of course, yeah, and they're not anti-imperialists, but they represent one particular current in the Middle East. And they're critical of Saudi Arabia, which is good, right? And the Saudi Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood don't like each other. So there you go. All right, socialism with American characteristics. What will it look like? Well, I think that there will probably be a big market sector. I think that there will probably be, huge efforts to rebuild the country. I think that there will probably, be separation of church and state, and there will be a big Bill of Rights component in it. But ultimately, socialism with American characteristics is going to be built by the American people in the process of breaking free from capitalism. And they will make it themselves, right? I'm not advocating it. I'm saying we need to develop it. We need to develop a kind of socialism that will work in this country. We need to stop LARPing and pretending to be Che Guevara and Kim Il-sung and focus on building a form of socialism that will work in this country. All righty. Origins of Eurocommunism. Well, the term Euro-communism, it was actually, many people say the term was actually invented by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Other people dispute that. It refers to the fact that in 1978, the Communist Party of Italy, the Communist Party of France, and the Communist Party of Spain came together and denounced the Soviet Union. Now, they didn't say the Soviet Union wasn't socialist, but they denounced the leaders of the Soviet Union. They criticized the leaders of the Soviet Union, and they denounced them. And that's the origins of Eurocommunism. And Eurocommunism was communist parties, most specifically communist parties in Europe, very big communist parties, cutting, basically breaking somewhat with the Soviet Union. And the French Communist Party, the Italian Communist Party, the Spanish Communist Party, the Japanese Communist Party moved this way. The British Communist Party was divided. They had the Euros, which were Euro-communists, and the Tankies. That's where the term tanky comes from, because there was a divide in the British Communist Party between the Tankies and the Euros. Well, the Euros were the Euro-communists. And it was basically a lot of communist parties in a lot of countries cutting their ties with the Soviet Union, denouncing Soviet foreign policy. And that U.S. intelligence worked really, really, really hard to make this happen. Really, really hard to make this happen. There was a huge, huge covert effort to lure Marxists and leftists in Europe into believing that the Soviet Union was not their friend and the USA wasn't so bad. Look at the Oscars, right? 1978, you look at the Oscars where they're giving Lillian Hellman the award, and they got Jane Fonda there, and they got Vanessa Redgrave talking about Zionist thugs and hoodlums, and it was you watch the Oscars from the 70s. I mean, late 70s, Carter administration era, when Zbigniew Brzezinski was running it was National Security Advisor, and late 70s, the U.S. intelligence was really, really working hard to court leftists, especially in Europe, and convince them that the United States wasn't so bad and that the Soviet Union wasn't so good. And there was a huge amount of attempts to manipulate leftists. And that's what Brzezinski was all about. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the foreign policy strategist, who rose up the ranks. He came out of Harvard, and he was in the Carter administration, and then Ronald Reagan gave him the Medal of Freedom. His strategy was about playing communists against each other, manipulating communists against each other. He said the USA could not directly attack the communists because that would bring them all together. Instead, it was about manipulating communists against each other. And that's what the late Cold War was. It was U.S. intelligence manipulating communists against each other, right? And, first there was the Sino-Soviet split. Then there was, there were the Euro-communists. There was the Kampuchea War, where the United States was covertly supporting Pol Pot. And Pol Pot attacked Vietnam and fought the Vietnamese. And then China invaded Vietnam to support Pol Pot. In Southeast Asia, you had communists killing each other. There was Ethiopia, where, you had the communist Derg, which was the Marxist-Leninist faction in the military, took power in 1978. So then you had the CIA funding Eritrean armed resistance, and all the Maoists and Enver Hoxha supporters were taking up arms against the Derg. You had South Africa, right? In South Africa, you had the African National Congress, which was the main anti-apartheid fighting group, Nelson Mandela, etc. Well, then you had this group called the Pan-African Congress, the PAC, which was covertly being supported, where they were going around and killing people in the African National Congress and saying that they were agents of the Soviet revisionists. You had Angola, where the CIA was giving guns and weapons to Jonas Savimbi, the leader of UNITA, right, who was calling himself a Maoist, right? And he was a mass murderer, he was a cannibal, and then in the 80s he declared, I'm not a Maoist anymore, I believe in Western capitalism. But in the 70s, UNITA, Jonas Savimbi, were waging war against the MPLA in Angola, right? And that's Brzezinski's strategy. How do we play communists against each other? How do we get communists to kill other communists? That's what that was. Yeah. And Eurocommunism was a development that came out of the Brzezinski strategy in the Cold War. Alrighty. Do I support socialist nationalism? Well, see, that's probably supposed to be a trick question, because I'm not supposed to know that Hitler called himself a National Socialist, so I'm supposed to say, yeah, I support that, and they're going to be like, he supports Hitler, and that's dumb. But at the end of the day, right, so, I obviously don't support Hitler, and fascism and German Nazism or anything like that. But if you ask the question, do you support socialist nationalism? Well, look, there are many countries around the world that are struggling for their national liberation, right? Meaning that they want to, establish their independence as a nation, and that they seek to build a socialist economy in order to do that, right? Vietnam, China, Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. So if that's national, the thing is, though, you can't really, the problem with nationalism is that nationalism tends to put the needs of your nation above all else, and that Marxism is, in essence, proletarian internationalism, but it fights for national liberation. Mao Zedong said that that he was both a patriot and an internationalist. Kim Il Sung said that he was both a patriot and an internationalist, and that a communist can be both a patriot and an internationalist. Nationalism or national chauvinism that says your nation is superior to all others, that's wrong. But one who wants to free their own nation and use socialism to do it, that's very good. And most socialist revolutions have taken place on that basis. All right. Why did Herbert Walker Bush not remove Saddam Hussein? Simple. The reason that Herbert Walker Bush... how many socialist countries are on the earth? Alrighty. Right? Why did Herbert Walker Bush not remove Saddam Hussein? Well, I think it's because of the fact that I think they calculated that in Iraq at that time they would have lost. Saddam Hussein was very popular coming out of the Iraq-Iran War, and his government was very strong at that point. In fact, you read New York Times articles. Iraq had a very strong economy in the 1980s, and his government was very popular. The USA did not invade Iraq for another decade because they needed to destroy Iraq's economy for 10 years first, right? That when the USA invaded Iraq, it very effectively destroyed the country. That may not have happened. Iraq could have turned into a new Vietnam. You have to remember that the Gulf War happened at a time when the Soviet Union wasn't completely gone. It was like on the brink of falling, but hadn't completely fallen. And that the Gulf War, it's not clear the United States would have been able to do that. Saddam Hussein was very popular within Iraq at that point. The Iraqi economy was very strong, and they could have lost, right? They had to, throughout the 90s, there were sanctions that were imposed on Iraq, and, 500,000 Iraqi children died as a result of the sanctions. They bombed Iraq, they destroyed the water system. I mean, it was a decade of devastating Iraq's economy and weakening Iraq before the invasion happened, and that's the important thing. Alrighty. Is BDS hypocritical? Well, see, this is a common, pro-Israel talking point, right? They'll say, oh, there's a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, but there's not a boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against Turkey or against, Saudi Arabia. So that proves that deep down, all the people that are criticizing Israel are just a bunch of anti-Semites. Well, here's the thing. The U.S. government is propping up Israel, right? $38 million a year, huge amounts of military aid and weapons. Israel would not exist if it were not for the United States. The United States props up Israel and keeps Israel going. So that makes it different, right? I mean, Saudi Arabia purchases U.S. weapons, and Saudi Arabia, I would be for boycotting Saudi Arabia. But I think that the reason that there's a BDS movement against Israel is because of the fact that, first of all, Israel is very much tied in with the Western capitalist economy, and that Israel is directly propped up by the United States. I think that is the issue. Okay, so why does the movement focus on Palestine? I think that the reason the movement focuses on Palestine is because among the Muslim world, there is just widespread sympathy for the Palestinians. Whereas with other issues, there's not unity, right? Any Muslim anywhere in the world is going to support the Palestinians. Any Muslim, right? In Indonesia, Muslims in Indonesia are going to support the Palestinians and oppose Israel. Muslims in, Uzbekistan, right? Well, no matter where you go in the world, Muslims are going to support Palestinians. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia, when it comes to Turkey, when it comes to Iran, there's a lot of division over those other countries, right? But the whole Muslim world is united in supporting the Palestinians against Israel. So that's why it's an issue that you can get a lot of unity around, right? There's whole trends of people, right? That they will protest Israel. They won't protest, the U.S. in Syria. Oh, they say, oh, Assad's a dictator. They won't, they're not in favor of better relations with Iran. They hate Iran. They hate Gaddafi, but they will protest around that because that's one thing that like all Muslims, all the Arab world, all the Muslims of the world can kind of agree on, and that because of that, it's an issue that you get a lot of traction on because there's a huge amount of support. There's a lot of rich Saudis that will support protests for Palestine. There's a lot of wealthy people in Qatar. There's a lot of wealthy people in Oman. Basically the entire Muslim world is on board with protesting Israel. And I think that that's why that issue, that's one thing that, no matter what you think about Iran, no matter what you think about Syria, no matter what you think about Libya, no matter what you think about Egypt and al-Sisi, no matter what you think about any issue in the Middle East, if you're a Muslim, you tend to oppose Israel and you tend to support the Palestinians. And that's why it's an issue that you get a huge amount of energy on, whereas you don't tend to get a lot of energy on other issues. And I think that's the issue. No, it's not because everyone protesting Israel is secretly involved in a global conspiracy and they're all Nazis. No, that's not what it is. But that's what pro-Israel people will say, right? That the fact that people protest Israel and don't protest other countries proves that deep down they all just want to kill all Jews. And that's not true, okay? I'm telling you that people that engage in boycott, divestment, and sanctions are not trying to kill all Jews. And, I mean, there are a lot of Jewish people who are involved in boycott, divestment, and sanctions, okay? So I'm just telling you, are there anti-Semites out there? Yes. There's plenty of anti-Semitism in the world. There's plenty of bigotry against Jews. I'm not going to deny that. But people who want to engage in boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the majority of them, the overwhelming majority of them, are not, bloodthirsty Jew-hating Nazis, right? And you didn't expose that by asking that question. Um, you know, but I mean, does anti-Semitism exist? Absolutely, absolutely, anti-Semitism exists, and it's not good. It should be opposed. Um, yeah. So there you go. All right, Kent State University. I assume the person was referring to the 1970 incident. 1970, May 4th of 9. Well, actually, it started earlier. It started like 4 days earlier. May 1st of 1970, there was an anti-war protest at Kent State University in Ohio. Kent State, I grew up very close to Kent State. Been there many times. Kent State, it's a little town. It's in Ohio. And there's a college there. It's a working class campus, a lot of bars, people like to drink. It's an Ohio State University. It's Kent State University. And there was a small anti-war protest that was happening in response to the invasion of Cambodia, right? That Nixon had been saying that the USA had not been having troops in Cambodia, and that was revealed to be a lie. Yes, the USA did have a lot of troops in Cambodia, so there was a lot of outrage. All across the country, people were protesting. So in Kent, Ohio, there was a small protest going on, and in response to the small protest that was happening, they closed all the bars. And it was Friday night, and they closed all the bars in a college town. That was not a good thing to do. And the police were not very nice when they were kicking people out of bars. So pretty soon the students started scuffling with the police, and pretty soon a small protest against the war turned into a full-on riot because it was mainly the cops were kicking people out of bars. And like a lot of property was destroyed, and the students didn't like getting kicked out of the bars, and the anti-war protest happened, and bikers pretty soon were breaking stuff, and it was just a lot of unrest. That was May 1st. In response to the, huge amount of rioting in Kent, in response to, closing down the bars and closing down the city in response to the protests, the governor of Ohio sent the National Guard. They sent the National Guard to Kent State. And they declared martial law in the city and that they wouldn't allow any public gatherings. And so, the military was all over this little college. So the students decided that they were going to continue protesting. And so they continued protesting. There was a military building that was burned. It was like the ROTC building. It and it was burned. And they continued every day having their protests, even though the National Guard was there. They would gather, they would have their protests. The National Guard would break it up with tear gas. And then on May 4th, they opened fire. They opened fire into the crowd. Unarmed crowd. Nobody in the crowd had any guns. Nobody in the crowd had any weapons. They had Viet Cong flags, NLF flags. Maybe somebody threw a rock or a bottle or something, but they opened fire into the crowd. 4 students were killed. 2 of the students, Jeffrey Miller and Allison Krauss, were protesting. And 2 of the other students were actually bystanders. They were killed in other parts. They were just hit by stray bullets. There was a guy who was shot through the wrist. There was another guy who was in. There was a few people, I think, who were disabled for life in a wheelchair. The National Guard just opened fire on the students at Kent State University. It's Kent State Massacre. 1970, May 4th, 1970s. I don't know anything about mosquitoes. I don't know that kind of biology. Yeah, that happened. And it was a deeply tragic event. And when I was growing up, every year around May 4th, I would hear these people, old people, were like traumatized, right? And they would say things like, they deserved it, they should have shot more of them. Everyone's so mad about these students who were protesting, but they were disrespectful of the country. They were swearing, they did drugs, they deserved it. I heard all kinds of things about Allison Krauss, the girl who was shot. They called her a slut. That was one thing, that she was a slut. She was sleeping with a lot of different guys, and it was awful. I would just hear awful things, right? And every year at Kent State University, and when I was in college, because I was a political activist, I actually would go to the ceremony, the commemoration they would have. I mean, every year at Kent State University, they have a memorial ceremony. It's a horrendous incident. But still, I bet if you go there now, there are probably still people in the area I grew up in Ohio, that insist the students deserved it somehow. That if you're left wing, if you're protesting the government, you're an evil commie, and it's pretty sad. There was an incident at Jackson State University, and that was a couple days later. There was a college where a group of African American students were protesting, and the local police came and shot them. Shot 2 students. There was a massacre at a college, Jackson State in Mississippi. 2 days later, it was a horrendous incident. That's all I can say about it, right? And the fact that I grew up hearing people justify this mass murder. That was pretty awful. All right. Huawei phones, Huawei phones are great. I like Huawei phones. I think they're really great. I wish I could buy one. This person super chatted. Huawei Technologies is the what is it? It is the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. It's a great state-controlled mega corporation created as part of socialism with Chinese characteristics, it's great. There's a great article from the Harvard Business Review that talks about how Huawei Technologies actually is an example of profit sharing working. It's actually a great example. Nowadays, Huawei is public enemy #1 in the United States, so it's too bad. I'm getting tired. All right, I'm going to get through these last super chats real quick, and then I'm going to end this. All right, uncritical to China. Look, I am in favor of criticism of any country. But I think that the issue with Khrushchev, right, and the secret speech is that people were blind apologists. They said there was nothing wrong with the Soviet Union. They just idealized it way too much. I don't think we should idealize China over the top, but we should admit China's huge successes. That China is a very successful socialist country. Does it have problems? Sure, right? And I don't think we should try to pretend that there aren't any problems in China. There are plenty of problems in China. But is China a socialist country? Yes. Is China very successful? Yes. What will the judicial system look like under socialism? I don't know, right? It's different in different countries. I would hope it would be democratic. I hope it would involve, the masses of people, but it's different in different countries. All right. Is the synthetic left the biggest barrier right now? I would say yes. At this point, the fact that there are millions of people in the streets protesting right now, fighting for socialism, but they're not getting any closer. There's an ideological problem. There is an ideological problem in the country right now. That real socialist ideology has been eroded by the synthetic left, and that we need to engage in an ideological pushback. I think that's very important. So in a way, you could say they're the biggest barrier. I mean, obviously, the biggest barrier is American capitalism. The reason we can't get over it is because there's so much ideological confusion. But, the synthetic left is a result of American capitalism. It's the result of a huge distortion of left wing politics by imperialism. So it's not exactly. It's a result of the bigger problem, but it's a problem facing us. All right. Okay. How many socialist countries exist in the world today? Well, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, obviously there's China. Obviously there's Cuba. Obviously there's Venezuela and Bolivia. Obviously there's Belarus. There's Vietnam. There's Laos. But then there's like some murky area, right? So Angola. I would say Angola is a socialist country, but, it's very poor, but it does have a state-run economy, yes. I would say Zimbabwe is a socialist country. What about South Africa? Not exactly clear. Is South Africa a socialist country? I mean, it's a pretty capitalist economy, but or maybe, I don't know. It's not exact. There's a lot of it's not exactly clears, right? You know, there are some countries that I would say are definitely socialist. There are other countries that are, DPRK, right? North Korea, right? But there are other countries where it's not as clear, right? And the other thing is that China's state-run socialist economy has a huge amount of influence outside of China, right? There are many countries in Africa where, okay, maybe the country's capitalist, but it's so dependent and so in bed with China's socialist economy that they function almost, in coordination with the Chinese state central planners. So it's not exactly clear. And I think it's not going to be exactly clear. Nicaragua is a great country, right? Nicaragua is a socialist country. But I think that it's going to become, the more that the Belt and Road and China's, and the anti-imperialist bloc of countries expands, the more it's going to be unclear, whether a country is fully socialist or not. And the more that there are going to be countries that are partially in with the anti-imperialist bloc, partially in with the West, there's going to be a lot of countries that are kind of caught in between. And it's not the national barriers thing. Just like at this point, I think imperialism, I don't think there's a solid, it used to be, lead up to World War I, it was American imperialism versus German imperialism. There was British imperialism, French imperialism. Now there's a lot of multinationalism among imperialist interests. And I think that among the anti-imperialist bloc, there's going to be a lot of places where they'll have a foot in one country, but not fully. It's not going to be as total as it was during the Cold War. And that's probably a good thing, right? Socialism will overtake capitalism, but it's not necessarily going to be like, one country is definitely socialist, one country is definitely capitalist. I think that there will be countries that have a big sector that is in line with the socialist, wing of the global economy, and there'll be other countries where it'll be different. So that's my opinion. But anyway, I'm tired, and it's late, so I'm going to conclude this broadcast the way I end every broadcast. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And on that note, I am concluding. Thanks, folks. Have a good night.